Hey everyone, welcome back again for another video here in Xperia Experience. Thanks for joining me. My name is Peter, and today I'd like to discuss a commentary surrounding Sony's implementation of the Bokeh mode on Xperia series. As you may be aware, last year for the Android 14 update, Sony had updated the processing for their Bokeh mode. Uh, this left some negative taste in people's mouths because as a result of the updating, photos taken using portrait mode slash bokeh mode tended to blow out the highlights, or rather blow out the light sources in the photos, especially if they were behind your subjects. And there's a reason for this, and understandably, users were not happy with the changes, and Sony is partly to blame here because they didn't do a good job of explaining what the processing does and how it's updated, and leaving people to fend for themselves on how to properly figure out how to use this thing. So with that in mind, I'll be showing pictures taken with the Xperia 1 Mark V series, which is also being used to record this video incidentally. But the same is true, or rather the same applies to Xperia 1 Mark VI because it uses the same sensors across all three lenses. So please let me know what you think, and hopefully you will get a better sense of what Sony is trying to accomplish here and when is the best time to use portrait mode. Once you understand the limitations of the software, you'll be better equipped to take shots with more intention, and hopefully this leads to better shots in the end. Anyway, enough talking. Here are the photos. Thanks. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce you guys to an app that I use to edit my RAW files. It's called Raw Therapy, and it's a powerful and most importantly free tool to edit RAW files. It supports all the major manufacturers such as Sony, Nikon, and Canon, and it mimics or has many of the major features that the more established platforms such as Adobe Photoshop / Lightroom offer, and it's a really great choice for budget conscious hobbyists / photographers. So if you try to get into the editing world, I really suggest Raw Therapy as it's a great tool, especially if maybe you're skittish as to buying a rather expensive subscription to Adobe. With that being said, let's get into the photos. So here I've taken a bunch of different photos. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to hopefully bring your attention to a couple of things that I consider when using the Bokeh mode on Xperia 1 Mark V. And again, the same is true with Xperia 1 Mark VI because they share the same technology across both phones. Before showing the Bokeh mode in effect, I wanted to give a quick tip as to when to use the Bokeh mode, and really the lens selection. Normally with devices on smartphones, the main camera is going to have the best sensor, and that's typically going to be paired with a wide angle lens. On a Sony Xperia 1 Mark V, it's a 24mm lens, and as with any wide angle lens, distortion is a problem. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture at 24mm taken in my kitchen of myself. It's not a not a professional photo by any means, just a very standard picture / selfie. And without a reference point, you may think that this is what it looked like in terms of the way my face is rendered, and it's okay. But when we switch to 85mm, you'll see a big difference in how my nose looks between the two lenses. So once again, this is 24mm, and pay attention to the way my nose looks when we switch to the 85mm. Here we go. So I'm going to just zoom up for 1 second. Notice the difference in my face. My nose isn't as bulbous, it's not as round. My face is not as slim as the 24mm lens. And At the 85mm telephoto, my face is, this is a much better representation of what it looked like in real life. And this is something to consider when taking portraits of people. The natural tendency is to use the main camera on any device, the Sony included, because that has the best sensor, right? It gathers the most light, it's the sharpest, and that's normally our go-to. But sometimes, depending on how far your subject is from the camera, the introduced, or the distortion introduced by the lens can be very unflattering, right? Especially at the corners. So here we are again in 24mm, and hopefully you can see the difference in how my face is rendered. In this case, it's much more slender, and in this case, the prominent feature is my nose. It's much bigger, to be honest, and it's not a terrible photo, but I notice it. And if you're going to want to edit this photo, you'd have to manipulate the photo to remove some of that distortion. So just something to keep in mind when trying to take portrait shots of people with a wide angle lens, especially up close. So we're going to go into the bokeh mode on the Xperia 1 Mark V and what Sony's philosophy is behind that, okay? So here is just a reference photo of me at night taking a selfie, and I specifically chose a picture with light sources in the background. So just some brief history. As part of the Android 14 updates, the Xperia 1 Mark V received an update to the bokeh mode algorithm. And what it does is it tries to simulate the look of Sony's mirrorless camera line. And what that means is that if you have light sources in the background, those light sources will tend to be overexposed and they'll look a little fuller because Sony is trying to recreate the bokeh ball seen on their mirrorless cameras. And you could be forgiven for not realizing this or not knowing this, because Sony did not do a good job of educating its customer base as to what was happening in the new bokeh mode, other than saying, hey, we have a great bokeh mode, check it out. And this has led many users to experience what they consider bad photography coming out of the device. Many YouTube reviewers say the same thing, and it's because Sony just didn't educate people on this, right? So again, this is a 24mm lens, no bokeh mode, it's a standard photo, and we're going to switch to the bokeh mode turned on, and pay attention to the light sources, how they change as we switch over to the bokeh mode being turned on. So here we go. Notice how here the light sources are much rounder, okay, and they're much more artistic in a sense. If I go to, especially in the corner, lower left hand corner light sources, these look like bokeh balls coming from a mirrorless camera. Now, this is obviously digital, it's artificial. The bokeh ball shape and contour is based entirely on the camera settings, right, and how many aperture blades are in use at that point, right? Because the shape of the bokeh ball is controlled by your aperture value. But without digressing too much, just take a look at the difference in the light sources again. They're much rounder, they're fuller, they look more, you can make the case they're slightly overexposed, and this is what's happening in the Sony devices, and it's intentional. It's not an accident. I think the problem is that because people aren't aware of this, they'll take a photo in with the bokeh mode turned on, and there could be many light sources in the background. So if you have a very strong light source, such as the sun, or maybe you're in a room with many lamps, and the lamps themselves are close to the subject, distance-wise, then it will appear that these light sources become blown out, right? And it can lead to a ruined photo. And the whole point of this is to say that you have to consider where your background is. You can't just do a quick snap of a picture, of a subject using the Sony devices. Now, that's Sony's philosophy. That's their mantra. They don't want you to just take a quick snap here and there, even though the phone has an auto mode, but they expect it to be more intentional with your photos, okay? And knowing this, how the bokeh mode operates should help you plan your shots a little better, to take into consideration what's happening in the background in terms of the light sources. Other devices, such as from Samsung, Apple, Galaxy, really all the major devices, with maybe the exception of the Vivo, they tend to leave the background more or less as it is, right? And just blur the background. They don't really mess with the light sources. So this has the effect of creating a flatter image in the sense that, the highlights are controlled, shadows are not crushed. But even though that's technically what the user may want, right? Because the phone is trying to determine what the best picture is in auto mode, let's say. That's not always what artistically matters, right? So the big thing with other devices is that they don't take into consideration what the intent is behind the photo. They just try to give you a photo that's evenly balanced, that's not too, maybe slightly sharpened, a little contrasty, something to make it pleasing, Instagram ready, as they say. But there's no consideration as to the intent behind the photo, and that's what Sony is trying to do here. So in traditional cameras, the highlights are allowed to be overexposed because what happens is your eyes are now naturally drawn to the subject in this scenario. If, let's say, these light sources were, if I were outside and this is just the sun, and the sun was overexposed, that kind of harsh element is displeasing to your eyes, and that causes your eyes to naturally move towards the subject of the photo. When you have phones using extreme HDR to try to control the highlights, yes, you can see the sun a little clearer, but in my personal opinion, that makes the image much flatter and less interesting when done, when taken to its extreme. Obviously, there are cases where you don't want too much overexposure because it can be hard to control that in post. But generally speaking, having overexposed highlights isn't necessarily a bad thing depending on how you use it. So just consider that when taking your photography. Again, Sony wants to be intentional with your photography, and this is a perfect example of that philosophy within a bokeh mode. I'm going to switch again back to 24mm without bokeh mode on, just so you can see the difference in how these light sources are rendered. So switching back. And notice the lights are much smaller, and they are overexposed here, but there is not, actually prior to the update, these light sources would not have been altered the way they are now. You still get a blur background obviously, but there would be nothing special with these light sources. And the bokeh mode, rightly or wrongly, does change that, right? and it's up to you. It's your personal preference whether you like this or not. I personally do, but it does take some consideration as to how to set up the shot from a from a from a visual perspective. How far is my subject from these light sources? What angle should I be taking the photo at to try to avoid too many lights in the background, let's say, and things that make you a more intentional photographer. So I personally think it's a good thing, but I completely understand how that can be annoying to the more casual user that just wants to quickly take a photo and just share it with their friends online, right? So here we are back with the bokeh mode on, and yeah, so this is just my take on Sony's bokeh mode implementation. Please let me know what you think. I appreciate any comments. I'll try to respond to any questions you may have, but hopefully you walk away from this video with some extra knowledge, and I really hope to assist in any way I can. Thanks for watching. Take care.